IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. I am Sunila and today I have with me Suresh and Surat, and we three are going to be talking about citizen science. Now, all of you must have come across various forwarded WhatsApp messages when the pandemic started, talking about how we could ward off the COVID-19 virus, and there were some particularly insane solutions that were provided for that. One of my favorites is how the vibrations coming from banging the plates were, helpful in eliminating the COVID-19 virus. And then there were other messages saying that, that if we breathe in the air from like hair dryer or something could actually kill the COVID-19 virus. Now, as insane as they might sound, there are actually certain sections of population who genuinely believe these kinds of solutions, and then they keep forwarding these messages to other people. And I don't need to tell all of you guys like what are the implications of such fake forwards. Now, today I have with me Suresh and Surat. Surat is a senior research associate at Atal Incubation Center and is also a science writer. And Suresh is a program officer for Department of Science and Technology Innovation Policy Fellowship Program. And he also works at the Department of Science and Technology Center for Policy Research in IISc. Now, these both, they have written a piece for the print where they talk about citizen science and how it can be helpful in warding of the fake information. So, hi Suresh and Surat.
Yes. Hi, Sunila. Thank you very much for having us. Really looking forward to this interaction. And hopefully our voice will reach to more people through this medium. Thanks a lot.
Hi, Sunila. Yeah, happy to be involved in this discussion.
Great to have you here, guys. So let's just start with, basics. Can you guys tell us what is exactly citizen science? Like, what does it entail?
Right. So citizen science can be thought of a participatory model where non-professionals, which include people who are not science experts, they can be involved as collaborators in various aspects of scientific research, which can include data gathering to data analysis. So this is the basic idea of citizen science. And this model is different from the usual top-down model of how information is usually disseminated in scientific circles, where information is, for example, passes from scientific experts to people, whereas in the citizen science model, people themselves can be the generators of information, which is a different paradigm than how science, dissemination of scientific information usually works. So while the idea of citizen science is something which we have been hearing for the past few years, the concept itself, it may be several thousand years old, where we have reports from almost 2000 years ago from China, where local locust outbreaks were documented by public. So but this was the term of citizen science itself was coined relatively recently in around 1994, where a person called Alan Irwin was first to use this term. But like I said, the concept itself has been around for thousands of years.
That is interesting. I mean, I had no idea that the concept of citizen science has been around for so long. I mean, 2000 to 3000 years old is quite a long time. So what are some of the examples of citizen science projects? Like, how effective have they been, and like in what areas are they typically concentrated?
So maybe I can start with adding to what Surat was mentioning, that citizen science in its modern form is relatively new, like how it is conceptualized now, and it has still gained enormous traction in last two decades, more so in the global north, with hundreds of citizen science projects currently being operational worldwide in fields as diverse as astronomy, ornithology, meteorology, oceanography, agricultural sciences, and even quantum computing. With that, I would like to mention few large scale citizen science projects that are going on. One is something called iNaturalist. It's an online platform for mapping and sharing the observation regarding biodiversity worldwide. It has more than 1 million users, and it has so far got hundreds of citations in scientific publications. There's another such citizen science project called Universe. It uses the pattern recognition capabilities of human brain for the classification of galaxies. So far, it has like 2 million users and classified over 100 million galaxies so far, which is really amazing. There's another project called Quantum Moves. It uses gamification as a tool to find solution to complex research problems related to quantum computing. It already has like 2 lakh players who have played it. So these projects, can be in area as long as the experimental design allow for like large scale collection of data or data analysis. However, many projects seems to be concentrated in areas like environment, ecology, astronomy, and experimental physics. In terms of the projects that are main projects or initiatives, citizen science initiatives that are being done in India, we have initiatives like Hornbill Watch, Roadkills India, and India Biodiversity Portal, and they have mobilized thousands of people and generated awareness about scientific method and also the environmental protection. In case of India, most of these projects seems to be in the area of environment and ecology fields and are mostly concentrated in southern states. Like recent time, as you can imagine, the digital technologies have really facilitated citizen science, and you can have a phone, like an app in the phone, or a gamified version of a project, and that is something which anywhere around the world can use. And in terms of impact, it has obviously generated a lot of interest in scientific endeavors and the understanding of science to the general public, which has been its biggest impact so far.
One thing which I would just like to highlight. For example, the kind of citizen science projects can be, for example, of two types. So one is one which involves large scale data collection. So this could include, like, for example, discovering new species or new behaviors or distribution of various animals, which is like the biodiversity. And so this involves like what are the various different kinds of species which are there in a particular region. So this involves a data collection. So the second type of citizen science projects may involve the analysis of already existing information. So this could include pattern recognition or logical operations. So these kinds of projects, for example, a lot of them lie in the area of astronomy, where you have huge data, where you have, for example, observations, and people can classify galaxies, or in quantum research, which Suryesh mentioned one citizen science project called Quantum Moves, which is again like a simulation game of logical operations. So there are again like two types, and mostly in India, you have more of the first type of citizen science project, which involves data collection. So, which is and which falls again more in the ecology and environment area, where again involving identification or discovering new species or behaviors or distribution patterns, etc. And the second type of citizen science projects are which involve data analysis or pattern recognition of already existing data sets, are lesser in India, I guess.
So I have come across like various pages on Facebook and Instagram, which are created by wildlife or ornithology enthusiasts. So they, as you said, like they upload information and pictures related to, possible sightings of new species and their behaviors, etc. So would those be considered as citizen science projects, like on a small scale, maybe?
Right. So you could consider them as citizen science projects, but because there are no uniform guidelines as such for how the data should be collected and how the data quality should be ensured, right? So the information that is collected from many of these projects might not be, for example, I mean, as useful as it could have been if, because one of the main issues with, for example, citizen science projects is how, because it's a crowdsourced effort, it's often difficult to maintain the data quality. So, how do you ensure the data quality which is being uploaded on the systems? So, as an exercise itself, it's definitely a citizen science exercise. But the idea of citizen science projects should be that it leads to good data which can then be used for further analysis and then adds to our global knowledge database. But in often cases, because of lack of stringent data quality or data monitoring protocols, this information, the aspect of utilization of this data or standard may not be as successful. So while you say this is definitely these efforts are definitely citizen science projects, but they could have much more potential if we have like a unifying principle in the country, all kinds of data, all kinds of citizen science projects which are undertaken in the country, which kind of brings us to the point of the lack of policy regulation, policy framework in the country for citizen science projects.
Right, right. So we will come to the policy provisions for that sometime later in this discussion itself. But let's talk about COVID-19. Now, as I spoke about it in introduction before, we know there was a lot of fake information or wrong information circulating, mostly through, WhatsApp and even Facebook as well, like all forms of social media. So, have there been any projects, citizen science projects, to combat this misinformation, not only in India, but on a global scale as well?
So, with respect to COVID, so for example, one of the projects which has been quite useful is the COVID-19 Kerala Citizen Science Project, which again has been a repository for collecting COVID-19 data in real time. Because, like we know, in a situation like pandemic, it's often difficult to collect information at grassroots level and from local geographic areas. So, in such a situation, and a crowdsourced initiative where people themselves input data into a system can be of really high importance. So this was the COVID-19 Kerala was a crowdsourced citizen science project which was initiated during the COVID period by a network of both scientists and citizen volunteers. So this initiative, it was also called COD-K. So they collected the COVID-19 data in real time and they curated it and made it available through public. And this kind of crowdsourced information can be invaluable in times of pandemic where it's again difficult to collect local information by either government or by credible news outlets.
Maybe I would just add that India was not the only country that was, where you were seeing this kind of citizen science projects happening in context of COVID. There were other countries as well, and even in countries like US and UK, certain citizen science initiatives started, which worked in this direction of raising awareness about the COVID-19 and also involving people in different stages of management, the epidemic management, and so on.
Right, and I can like only imagine how helpful these projects would be in times of pandemics. Like Surat rightly pointed out, we might have data easily available at the national level, but to have it available, at the smallest block level, it's very difficult. And projects like these, they can actually help the government as well, to design the interventions accordingly. So let's talk about the data sources for these kinds of projects. Do we have like open data sources for like particular sectors, say such as for, because you said there are projects mostly concentrated in the areas of wildlife and biodiversity, but there are other areas as well. So, do we have open data sources for that? Where do citizens get their data from?
So citizens themselves generate the data here, Sunila. So for example, for this biodiversity kind of projects, you'll have citizens taking pictures of birds and other animals, and those pictures can then go to the researchers, and they can analyze and see if there are new species that are identified. Same, for example, citizens are involved also in the data analysis part that's Surat also mentioned. So for example, in case of that galaxies and quantum computing experiments and projects, you'll have citizens analyzing the data that is coming out of some other observation that was done by a large scale project. For example, even in the particle accelerator that we have in CERN Geneva, a lot of data that comes out, and it's analyzed by volunteers around the world. So the data can come through different means. People themselves collecting data, and this could be people taking pictures, and also even small community level and school level citizen science activities. People can be collecting data using different methods. That is one. Second, also gamification can be a tool for both data data capturing and data analysis as well. So if someone has designed a citizen science project in a way that this project is gamified, and once that is there, then the data can also be collected as well as analyzed using that format by volunteers.
So just to add a bit, like for example, some of the societies also have open source data. For example, the TFR's giant microwave radio telescope. So the raw data that is generated by the all sky surveys done by TFR giant microwave radio telescope is kind of publicly available. So some of these organizations also have open access data which can be accessed by citizens who would like to do further analysis. But yeah, so that is another that is the bit about the data analysis for example, from databases that are publicly available.
So when we are talking of data, I would like to mention something about it as well, about the data ownership and data rights. So the data that is generated through citizen science projects, who should have the ownership over the data? And it has involved sometimes thousands of people, right? And who is the data custodian or data ownership? And there is a huge debate going on in the field to understand the ethics and other aspects of the data ownership and data custodianship of the data that comes out of the citizen science project. Who should be the authors? Who should be who should the data belong to that finally comes out of any citizen science project?
Right. Data is like a valuable asset, and of course, there would be ethical concerns about sharing that data. Now, speaking of data ownership and data sharing, let's talk about the policy provisions that we have or we may not have in India, for boosting citizen science as such. So, are there any policy provisions, that actually encourage educational institutions or scientific communities to actually set up such kind of projects? And if there are, is there any particular provision for data sharing and ownership?
First of all, there is no strong policy framework or institutional structure within our science ministries, departments, even science academies and universities, in most cases, to promote citizen science. Okay, the scientific social responsibility policy that came out of DST and DBT in 2019 does not mention citizen science, even though there is mention of how scientists, researchers should have, what kind of social responsibility they should have, but citizen science is totally missed on that. Draft of new science technology innovation policy, that is the 5th national STI policy, which was released last December, does touch upon citizen science in 2 of its chapters. But again, there is no detailed framework or mention of how to go about promoting citizen science. the attention it is getting, like the whole citizen science field in general in India, is far below the potential, given that the size of our country, the tech savvy population that we have, and kind of enormous scientific challenges that are there, which not always only in the global level but also at the national and local level. So there is a huge potential to be exploited. And also, I would like to mention that higher education institutes like IITs, ICERs, and national science academies should be taking a lead role in popularizing citizen science and creating rules and regulations and frameworks and set of best practices, for citizen science to flourish in India. Researchers also need to be sensitized about different kind of citizen science project that can be done, because not all scientific experiments or endeavors are suited for citizen science. So what are those which where we can do the citizen science and where we can't do the citizen science? So some kind of set of best practices and guidelines would be nice for researchers to have. So I mentioned there is no proper strong framework for this, but if it has to be evolved, then I would like to suggest two different things for having this kind of framework. One is, of course, like having this set of rules, best practices and guidelines. And second, it would be very nice to have some kind of online national portal. And this kind of portal, if combined with a dashboard, can act as a repository of all citizen science initiatives that are happening in India. It can also be used to facilitate connections among the stakeholders. It can such a folder should facilitate online registration and access to relevant guidelines and best practices. It should also contain the list of website associated institutes, project managers for different citizen science projects that are there. And it could also be like something of a maintain and ensuring transparency and ethical practices are being conducted. It could be a monitoring framework as well. So if all the data that is generated through citizen science is there on the framework, on this kind of portal, then it could be also good to manage and make sure that there is transparency and ethical rules are being followed in different citizen science practices. So these are my two suggestions to kind of take into account maybe when such policy is formulated.
So, like Suryesh mentioned, just adding on to that, so we definitely need policy for both encouraging more citizen science in the country, which, like Suryesh said, India has like a huge potential for it, and also for ensuring the data quality, which is one of the biggest criticisms of citizen science, that it's often difficult to maintain the data quality because as people from various populations might be contributing to it, and so there might be observer biases which might be there in the data which is uploaded. So we definitely need set of rules for that. And for example, in some of the countries now are beginning to formulate policies for it. For example, the US Environmental Protection Agency now has a site on quality assurance project plan for the citizen science projects that are happening in the country. And this kind of serves as a blueprint of how any citizen science project should run. And one of the suggestions for maintaining the data quality or for correcting the observer biases could be developing some kind of machine algorithms as a first level of data validation, which would, of course, this kind of algorithm would depend on what kind of citizen science initiative or what kind of project it is. But some kind of initial first pass for screening what kind of data is uploaded into the system. And it will also, of course, require further manual curation. So definitely we need guidelines as to how to initiate and maintain a citizen science project. And also to correct, like Suryesh said, like currently it's also the citizen science projects in India are also very heterogeneously distributed, both in terms of topics and geographical areas. So again, like he said, including various educational institutes from various geographic regions could help in kind of normalizing that and having more such citizen science projects distributed in regions which are now not currently tabbed. So yeah, and also, for example, in a recent report, NCRT recently said that for the students, for the education in India, learning is currently a big challenge which is facing the Indian education. and including citizen science at school education level could be a nice tool to give them real of how to solve real life experiences using these citizen science projects. So this could be a nice initiative to get more students to get them to learn about the scientific process and yeah.
Those are some pretty concrete suggestions that you guys made, and I totally agree with the suggestion that Suresh made about having a portal for all the citizen science projects, so that it is easier to network with all the stakeholders involved. It is easier to access the data, and it is also easier to avoid duplication of data. uh, now, this is all the more reason for government to actually formulate some policy in this regard. And our higher educational institutions in India actually have a lot of potential in encouraging these kinds of projects. And as Surat mentioned, it's not just the higher education institute, but also at school level. Like high schools can actually encourage students to collect and access genuine data, so that in the future they can tackle fake information effectively. To conclude this discussion, can you guys tell me what are the possible benefits of citizen science? What does India stand to gain from having citizen science projects?
Yeah, so like we've already seen, right, during the pandemic and even previously, we have like a huge lacuna in our education system, which is somehow not able to convey the scientific process. So you can convey science news, but the process itself, the scientific process itself, is somehow we are not able to convey via the education system. So one of the crucial benefits for the volunteers would be that one is they can get associated with a scientific exercise and learn the scientific process itself, which is more important than trying to gain knowledge about a new species or a new data point. So they get to know about how the process of science itself works. So this would be the greatest benefit for the volunteers. And for the scientists itself who work in areas which require large scale data collection, right? So this would be either like you've talked about biodiversity or ecology, but also other areas such as agriculture and astronomy. And also weather, for example. So some of these areas require large scale data collection. This provides like an innovative means of collecting data. So this could be like if done using proper protocols and in a standardized way, this could be like a win-win situation for both the scientist and the citizen or the volunteer who's involved in the project. So, and like Suryesh already mentioned, we have like a huge population in India, which is we have an ever increasing penetration of internet in the country. So, and we have a huge student population and young population. Yeah, so like Suryesh mentioned, so we have like a huge potential and an ever increasing penetration of internet. So both the fractions, both the volunteer and the scientists gain to win in this endeavor.
Maybe just to add on what Surat has already quite comprehensively covered, actually, I would like to highlight the benefit that society as a whole can get out of citizen science. Okay, so citizen science can help, further the scientific temperament and improve the society's understanding of how science actually works, which I believe is extremely important in this era when misinformation and disinformation often get a lot more reach and visibility than hard facts. So, for people to understand in general how science actually works instead of just believing a fact or a pseudo fact that was said by someone, and focusing more on the process than on the results that come out of science. And that kind of understanding can actually come as a side product of various citizen science projects.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for making me and our listeners understand what citizen science is exactly. And you guys made some pretty valuable comments and gave some pretty strong insights on how we can increase the reach of such projects and how the government can help do that. So thank you so much for that, and thank you to all our listeners for listening to All Things Policy.
Thank you, Sunila, for calling us.
It has been a great pleasure. Thank you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank the sponsors on our network this week, Surat Tires. So we had a fantastic week. Tune into This Round is on Me, where Gauri Devidayal has a chat with Divya Ravichandran on the issues of waste management in India and how recycling, composting, and using eco-friendly alternatives can help. On Filter Coffee Podcast, Karthik speaks with Lux Narayan about his book Name, Place, Animal, Thing, an inspiring non-fiction fable about hope, positivity, and living your best life. On All Things Policy, Anirudh Kanisetti talks to Prateek Wakre and Rohan Sheth about Australia's conflict with Facebook and Google and what this means for big tech companies and the news ecosystem. On the Simplified Podcast, Naren and Tony talk about greenwashing, which is businesses unfairly marketing themselves as eco-friendly just to ride the sustainability wave. You should also check out the Cyrus Says episode with Varun Deshpande of the Good Food Institute, where they talk about plant-based alternatives. Varun does a great show with us called Feeding 10 Billion. Do check out this episode of Cyrus Says. They have a really interesting conversation. On the Millennial Athlete, Tanvi and Shlok speak to the badminton doubles player Satvik Sairaj about his successful stints at some of the recently concluded games. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Come learn and experience the ABCDs of being queer with me, Shunetro,
and me, Farhad,
on our show Gay BCD.
The two of us take you through our stories and experiences of being gay men in the city of Mumbai and have candid
and sometimes downright scandalous
conversations about sexuality, gay culture, and everything in between.
Catch new episodes of Gay BCD every Tuesday on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get all your podcasts from.